afternoon and welcome to My Harlem Portraits. This is the show that wants to shed a light on the fundamental contributions of African Americans in the building of this country. And today we have an extremely exceptional guest with us, one who helped shape the political and economic situation of Harlem, at least during the last half a century. Of course, I am talking about the Honorable Charles B Rangel. Welcome to My Harlem Portrait.
Good to be with you today.
It's wonderful to see you today. So I will start with a very brief bio about you because you've done so many things that we would be here for 2 hours, not 28 minutes. So you were, in 1971, you became the Democratic US Congressman representing various districts in New York, and you defeated, in a primary challenge, a very famous long-time incumbent, Congressman Adam Clayton Powell Jr. So you started with a victory. When you retired in 2017, you were the second longest serving incumbent member of the House of Representatives. You have served continuously since 1971, as we said. You were also the Dean of New York's Congressional Delegation and the very first African-American chair of the very influential House Ways and Means Committee. You are also a founding member of the Congressional Black Caucus. And I also want to mention something else, which has nothing to do with politics, but I think is very important. You earned a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for your service in the US Army during the Korean War, because you helped a group of soldiers to get out in safety when they were circled by the Chinese army during the Battle of Kunuri in 1950. So thank you for your service for this country, which started very early. Then you started your career as a lawyer, and you were providing legal assistance to Black civil rights activists, among other things. In 1961, you were appointed Assistant US Attorney in the Southern District Court of New York by no one else than the US Attorney General, Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy. In 1964, with Assemblyman Percy Sutton, who then will become your political mentor, you formed the John Fitzgerald Kennedy Democratic Club in Harlem, which later would become part of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Democratic Club. In 1967, Harlem Democrats chose you to run to represent the 72nd District to Albany after the incumbent Percy Sutton was elected Manhattan Borough President. You served 2 terms in Albany, before being elected to the House of Representatives. And you became very famous and you rose up very rapidly up the ranks of the Democratic because of your specific approach, which was to combine your liberal views with a very pragmatic approach in order to find compromises both from the political and the legislative point of view. You were in particular interested in fighting to prevent the devastating effect of the planting of illegal drugs in Harlem. And so you became chair of the House Select Committee on Narcotics, where you helped define national policy on the issues during the 80s. And this is where we are going to talk about, the 80s, and the fact that by now you were known as one of the gang of 4, who one of the members was Mayor Dinkins. And we want to represent Mayor Dinkins because of all the amazing stuff he did for Harlem and for this city. So our wish is that him has joined his bride, as he called her, and is looking at us now. So welcome, Mr. Rangel, and please tell me and tell us who were the four and why did they call themselves the Gang of Four?
Well, first of all, let me say this, that I never say that I beat or defeated the late and the great Adam Clayton Powell.
Mm-hmm.
Adam Clayton Powell served our community for some 26 years. His voice was not only a voice representing Harlem, but indeed African Americans throughout the United States and in some parts of the world. He was unfairly excluded from being seated by the Congress. He went to Supreme Court. He won his case, but he was stripped of his seniority. Now, I have no idea why at that point in time, Adam Powell decided that he was going to spend most of his time on the island of Bimini and not in the Congress that reelected him. But when it reached the point that as a member of the Assembly, it became abundantly clear to me that Adam Powell's political future not only looked like a defeat, but because I was one of his defenders, because I was a Democrat, it looked like I may be defeated as well as people would go down the Democratic Party line. So I went to Bimini with my wife, directed by Governor Rockefeller, to try to persuade him to come home because he was vulnerable. And he didn't, and I did run, and I did fill that vacancy. But I'm convinced that when history is written, even though he was one of the most flamboyant people in the Congress, that his record of 500 pieces of legislation, his working with the late President Lyndon Johnson, and the fact that he gave so much hope to the people in Harlem. He was able to we weren't able to drive the buses to work in the stores. And this was during my lifetime, so we're not talking about Mississippi and Alabama.
Yes.
And so Adam Powell's son and I, or his two sons, became friends after his death. But I still believe whenever I can, I will make certain that that record is clear. When you talk about the Gang of Four.
Thank you for that. That's very important.
It is.
Thank you.
And older people know this. And I just want to make certain that somehow in the history books, it's properly recorded. There was a book written called King of the Hills, where Adam Powell went against the Democratic Party and endorsed Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower could not politically talk about all the things he did for Black folks through Adam Powell. And Adam Powell certainly couldn't allow us to believe he was working with a Republican president. But even during that period, which is revealed in the book, he was sent to Africa and other places, not as a Democrat, but as representing the United States of America. But to get to the Gang of Four, the truth of the matter is, we were attacked by that name when there was a meeting being held to determine who wanted to run for the mayor of the city of New York. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, it was a bunch of people from Brooklyn and the Bronx. And at that particular time, they did not have the political power that they do have today. And we didn't think it was comical but we really didn't pay too much attention to what they were going to decide in Brooklyn and the Bronx, because we knew that sooner or later that we would have some input in that decision. So we decided to go to the meeting, to listen to what they had to say. They knew that none of the candidates was coming from Manhattan, and we went to the meeting. Now, what we did not know is that a decision had been made, an agreement had been made for one of the group to become borough president of one of the boroughs, and the other was to get his support for. And the whole thing was absolutely ridiculous because it was planned as though the fact that we had said that we were going to be there, that we were supporting an agenda that had never been shared with us. In any event, we were attacked by the person who thought he was going to win. And they said, well, what happened? He said, the Gang of Four stabbed me in the back. Well, at that time, the Gang of Four wasn't a very complimentary term. But when it hit the newspaper, the people back home were proud of us for stopping something that they didn't believe should have happened in the first place. And we laughed so much about the fact how the Gang of Four, we were able to gain a reputation of solidarity, which in itself, in the great borough of Manhattan, meant a great deal, especially to Black and brown people. When we joined together, we hardly knew each other that well. Percy Sutton, who was my mentor and 10 years older, was an advocate in the civil rights movement, and he had spent so much time in the South fighting for equal rights. David Dinkins was a close friend of J. Raven Jones, who was a very, very important political figure. When Percy and I decided that we were going to work together, he and Ray Jones didn't even talk to each other. And so when Ray Jones said that as long as I'm with Percy Sutton, that we couldn't work together, I just gotten out of law school. I'd been in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was 32 years old. I said, well, Mr. Jones, you're making one hell of a decision as it affects you and me. You didn't even know Percy Sutton. You dislike Percy Sutton. And if you're making the decision as it relates to me and you do owe me and he at least the respect of meeting them. The three of us met and fell in love with each other. And he was amazed how bright and the work that Percy had done in the South. And of course, Basil Patterson, who went on to become the deputy mayor and also so close in everything that we did, had worked very closely with Percy in the NAACP. Dave Dinkins, on the other hand, came out of the political organization of Ray Jones. So we came together, and as fortune would have it, none of us had a political plan to enhance our own political advancement. We didn't have lanes to cross. We didn't have, you will run for this and you would run for this. All we knew is that in the village of Harlem, we were having tremendous success in being able to have the other boroughs to know that we were organized in the city council, in the assembly, later in the Congress. And by working together, we were able legislatively to bring more together as a team. And not only that, it was the gang of hundreds, because they knew we were together, and young people like Carl McCall and so many others that advanced in the city, the state, and indeed the country, was because we were able to project that image of not wanting political advancement for ourselves, but taking advantage of every opportunity we had to register people, to get them involved, and yes, to bring the resources to our community.
That is a amazing story, and it's very important to know more the details of how it was formed, because I heard about the Gang of Four. I'm Italian, so I moved here in 2013 for good, but I've been living in back and forth in Harlem since 2005, back and forth to Italy. And it was Ines Dickens during an interview who first mentioned the Gang of Four because her father was very near to you. And so I was very curious to know more about this Gang of Four. And now I have this opportunity.
Well, there's a whole lot of Italian history too, because a part of Harlem was East Harlem. And that's really where the first immigrant Italians would come. And so as we gained political attention, we had to work with Frank Rossetti and the old timers that were there to make certain there was a transition of not a new group of people versus an old group, but that we all were going through the same growth in population, so that my relationship with the Italian community was such that it lasts today. We've informed a group praising all the immigrants that came in from Ellis Island, and I was a part in forming it. So that David Dinkins used to call New York City a beautiful mosaic because it represented not just all of the colors, but all of the cultures. And once we reach that point of a mutual respect, once we gain the ability just to listen to what the other person's position was, even though initially they may be a conflict in terms of it, listening and working out and compromise, and especially winning, makes all the difference in the world.
And compromise in politics is the key for everything. I've worked all my life in politics because I was a director for the European Parliament Information Office in Italy. So I know that that's the key of everything. It's too bad that someone who is in White House right now has never understood that because he has no idea what it's doing. But
you know, you started earlier in making the virus, perhaps we can find some good in it. And I told you, it's very difficult, but you're right. But I think that the occupant of the White House now has been almost a message sent to us to how fragile our democracy really is. And while we had an African-American president with Obama, while so many people were saying, oh, thank you, God, I never thought I would see it, that the animosity, the hatred
yes,
that still exists in our country was hidden. People didn't wear the Ku Klux Klan sheets, but in their hearts they felt a sense of superiority. And then when the president-elect says, come, let us talk, this is our country, nobody's leaving it, so you might as well join and see what we can do to make it better. Because when those people drafted that Constitution, they never shared with America that they weren't talking about Black people, they weren't talking about women, they weren't talking about poor people. and they darn sure weren't talking about slaves. But there was one phrase that they put in that, and that is, in order to enhance a more perfect union. It's been slow, but we have been moving toward a mutual respect, that people would realize that by being able to help a community, to help a country, to help the world, that it makes us all better people. And doing good, you don't get a receipt from the bank, but it is something that makes you better, makes your ability to perform better when you know that what you're doing is helping somebody. And politics to me, I don't mean to be sacrilegious. I used to be an altar boy, but I always looked as the 12 apostles as being politicians and trying to show people what collectively they could do to change the situation they found themselves in. And David Dinkins, I don't think it can be challenged, was one of the most civil, gentle people that ever held that office. And the tremendous things that he was able to do when the city was in trouble was not with fanfares, but when some of our major corporations had threatened to leave, and one of them actually had contracts in Connecticut, and New York City was being considered on our last political legs, he called a meeting of public officials, business people, and it started off with a prayer by Connell O'Connor. And I had no idea where this was going to go, that we were in such bad shape as that we needed a priest to pray for us. But in bringing it all together, I was the senior member of Ways and Means. Senator Moynihan was the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. All of these corporations needed friendly legislation in order to move out of a central place and transfer to another. I'm not the nicest guy in the world compared to David Dinkins, but Moynihan had a way of saying, you people can leave New York City if you want. Both Charlie Rangel and I were born in New York City. We love New York City. And no matter where you move, we will find you. I'm telling you, the place that was about 100 people, business people, were shocked because that was actually a feeling that we all had. But saying that we did not think it would have any change in the attitudes, and it did.
It did.
They started laughing and joking and talking and realizing how few political people like David Dinkins, with enough people who disagree, would say, hey, he's such a nice guy. I'll go to the meeting and see what he has to say. The worst thing I've had as my longtime friendship with my dear brother is walking the streets with him. He loved people and children so much that we couldn't go a block without him acting as though everybody was his best friend. And I used to tell him, I'll meet you there, David, but I'd be darned if I can walk with you there. And I've heard a lot of people to disagree with him, but I've never heard anyone ever say anything bad about him. And when I think of the economic crisis, the crimes, the cultural antagonism that we had during his mayorship, there's no question in my mind that when the historians looked and saw what this guy, who was a Marine in his heart, a patriot in his mind, that he was able to do things that I have no problem in knowing that history is going to give him a fair shake, because you can't change the facts.
Well, I think history has already written a really incredible chapter on him, because he was really recognized everywhere in the world as exactly what you said, a real gentleman with a very smooth ways, but also he did a lot of things at the same time because of that. And I think that's very important. What you did with in your career and during that time with the Gang of Four was pretty unusual, because you were for people who had a lot of power, and I don't believe at that time it was easy for 4 Black men to have that much power. Can you tell me the obstacles that you went through, and on the other hand, who in the political establishment supported you in making sure that you could continue doing what you were doing?
I find it very difficult to talk about the acquisition of power. I truly believe that if you are doing a good job, if you're honest, if people believe in you, that you cannot get any more power than that. There was never a time, which happens so often, when a group of people are working together, the political opportunity would arise, and they all would want it. Just like the number of candidates that we have now running for mayor. We never, for whatever reason, we were all ambitious, but we were so satisfied with what we were doing and being effective in what we were doing. At one time, I belonged to one political association. Percy Sutton belonged to another one with Patterson. Dinkins belonged to another. And we had different candidates running against each other. And Percy said to me after his candidate won, he'd like for me to join him. And I said, after I win, I want you to join me. We met in a printer's place and said it. But one cold night, he called me. We didn't even know of a place to meet for fear that people knew that we just didn't know each other and really didn't want to know each other. But we sat in that car for about 3 or 4 hours in the cold because he was afraid of running out of gas. And we became fond of each other, but more important than anything else, we found out that I had just left the United States Attorney's Office. I had been counsel to President Johnson, and I had not known anybody that had gone to college. And so when Percy Sutton came from San Antonio and his father was a principal of a school, the class that he brought that I shared, and then on top of that, I had just married a beautiful girl that had graduated from a historical Black college. And we had dated for years before I even knew what a sorority or fraternity meant. And she always was a part of what I was doing. And so even though I was able to get a law degree and a bachelor's degree and honorary degrees, my real training was learning from people, my wife and from Percy and from his civil rights people. I had been in combat. I've killed, I've been left for dead, but I never saw the violence and the pain with Americans against Americans until Percy Sutton took me to Mississippi and Alabama. When I saw people, I walked from Selma to Montgomery, and these people were not in combat. They were doing this to make a better country. And it brought out something in me in Lenox Avenue. I had never left my neighborhood for any reason. I thought that the big school that I could see, CCNY, which I now do pro bono work, I thought that was Riverside Church. There was no reason for me to think about college until I got out the service and knew that I didn't know much more when I was discharged than I did when I enlisted. But bringing all that together, David Dinkins, his mother was a domestic. His father was a barber. He went into the United States Marines. And he went to a historic Black college, Howard University, where he met his beautiful wife. This was a new world for me. Howard University, my wife from Wilberforce University, Percy coming from a family of education, Basil Patterson, a lawyer. And so for me, it gave me the opportunity to learn more, to feel more comfortable with myself. But for the first time, I was able to help people that were in the same position I was before I joined the Army. I was not a patriot. My mom raised 3 kids without a dad. My older brother, who passed away, he joined the Army in 1941 before we were attacked because of economic reasons. As soon as he came home, I joined the Army long before Korea. And it was not patriotism, it was economics. But it gave us an opportunity to share our experiences, and it was 4 different roads that God allowed us to meet, to fall in love with each other, and somehow not to have the urge to compete with each other. David and I used to sometimes sit together at a meeting when we were bored. And he says, "Have you thought about one yet?" And I would say, "No." We had a game that we played. Could you remember any of the arguments that we had politically? Because we had disagreements, of course, but we could never come up with a situation where either he or I could say, "Don't you remember when we disagreed?" And because that reinforced our friendship and our brotherhood, we would use it. No one knew what we were laughing about. But the whole idea that you could know someone for close to half a century and you don't remember an argument is more than words.
It is fantastic. You know, you are making me very emotional because you are sharing with me a part of your life, and this reinstates the reason why I'm doing this show, which is to give back the way I can to Harlem, because Harlem has welcomed me as if I belong to the family. And I really feel that. And when you share these important moments of your life with me, I feel so honored because I'm talking to history right now. I'm talking to someone who has shaped the history of the village of Harlem, starting with the village of Harlem, but the history of the civil rights movement and the way that people see each other in this country. And I would like to share with you one thing. The beginning of the pandemic didn't really affect me that much. What started to really affect me was what happened, the murder of George Floyd. When that happened, and I saw that in the way it was with that policeman with his smile and that indifference, and it just, I felt sick. I felt sick, and all the events that followed, all the murders that have been happening of Black people all the time, but that were not known because we didn't have cell phones and recordings of it. But the fact that now the whole world could see it, for me, it's one more reason why we need to really speak about what has been happening in this country, because the world doesn't really know that African American people have been fighting for ever since so-called freedom to be considered human beings. And you have to fight much more and study much more and know much more and reach much more than any white American to be able to receive what is due to you. And I think that what happened with Obama, the fact that a Black man who wasn't a Black man just, his mother was white and his father was Black. So he was a mixed race, he had both in him, but the fact that he was elected as president, I think that's what made white supremacists, Ku Klux Klan, and all these people even more angry because they got scared. They got really scared that they were losing their power. And I think what we are seeing with this guy at the White House is a reaction to that. They cling on to this guy because they know he's a racist, he's an idiot, sorry. And they cling on to him because he is bringing up the agenda that they wanted to promote. So seeing this, living this in this country, coming from Italy and Europe, where I've never had this feeling of people hating just for the fact that you got more melanin, it makes no sense to me. So what you're doing and what people like you have been doing is fundamental and has to be known. I'm sorry if I had because you made me very emotional.
Well, there's nothing that you have said that I disagree with. I would like to add that because we have these instant recording with the iPhones, and because our American history really completely falsified
Yes.
the exclusion of certain people, that I was gratified to see the number of white young people who, just by being born white, enjoyed the benefits of preferential treatment and were willing to say, hell no, if I have it, I want everyone to have it. The one disadvantage that we Blacks in America have, one I like to say is that we love this country mainly because it's the only country we know. The second thing is that when our forefathers were brought here, the slave masters understood that the human brain allows it to fight for survival, but it needs the pride of identification for purposes of unity. And when you take away someone's name, their culture, their ability to be husband and wife, their ability to know who their parents were, and substitute that with saying that your color is evil and wrong, and the whiter you are, the more you are in the grace of God. I hope and I know that Dave Dinkins believed that one of his greatest accomplishments was convincing Nelson Mandela to visit Harlem, to stay at Gracie Mansion. And I don't talk about it often because I could never say it in the words that David Dinkins told me that Nelson Mandela appreciated the invitation, but had to remind David, even if he was mayor, that protocol demanded that he go through Washington and the State Department, and that there were other mayors and other governors. And David said he told him, Mr. Mandela, I am the first African American that ever became mayor of the city of New York. And that there are so many people in Harlem, in New York City, and in this country that look just like you and have no idea, Mr. Mandela, where they're from or where you're from. They admire and respect you because the white newspapers could not deny your courage of 27 years in fighting for justice and peace. But Mr. Mandela, they don't have a second home like most Americans. They don't have a song to pass on that their great-great-great-grandfather may or may not have said. They don't have this sense of pride that, yes, I'm an American first, but listen to the story and the songs and the poems of my home country. And Mr. Mandela, when you come, you will be opening up a book of history, because people would see you and be able to say, hey, Mom, doesn't he look just like me? And when I saw Nelson Mandela on 125th Street, like I said, my mother was born and raised in Harlem. I was born and raised in Harlem. I just never saw that much pride. I remember when Joe Louis used to win his fights when I was a kid, and how we all would come into the streets and wave. But this was a solemn, emotional sense where people could say, that's my cousin, and I don't know how we're related, but that's my cousin. And no white person in this country could deny it because of what they did to sever the historic relationship. So when David tells that story, a tear swells in my eyes, because we're not the only country that has practiced slavery. And I'm not as religious as I should be. I'm grateful to God for all that I am. But I know one thing: God never meant for human beings to treat each other the way slaves are treated, without any regard of the fact that they too look like God.
Yes. This is one fantastic what you're saying. You know, in Italy, we have, in the village where my parents live, we have a procession every year, religious processions, that takes the statues of Jesus Christ and the Madonna along the streets of the village. And we have 3 black Jesus Christ and a black Madonna. And I think that tells you that we should know our history. We should know who really Jesus Christ was. And I think in Europe or in Italy, let's say Italy, because other European countries were big colonies and so on, that is different, England, France, and so on. But Italy, I think we have, Hannibal came to Italy, okay? So there is definitely black blood in Italy, and you can feel that, I think. And I think that's why there is such a connection. That's what I feel anyway.
Well, I know one thing. I've had such wonderful experiences with my Italian friends, as they would among themselves joke that if you were from northern Italy,
Yes.
you had the benefit of more culture, exposure to better education. But of course, if you were from Sicily, you were more inclined to be in it. And I remember in the New York State legislature, we had a guy that was so eloquent, and he was a professor, and everyone liked him as a human being. But I knew his buddy, who was really from northern Italy, that they thought he was a hood. And he's explained to me, now, that son of a guy's from Sicily, and they treated him better than he treated me. But I received an award because I was active with a guy named Fugazi. You'll find, if you don't know about Bill Fugazi, you look it up. And he was the one that started this group of respecting our ancestors and where they came, and and to a large extent how Italians got any name that they gave them. They were coming over so fast. But he really understood how important it was for people, no matter what color they were. And because I would attend these annual national Italian award things, I got late one night in an Italian neighborhood. I was getting an award, and a half-blind old Italian was passing out the awards. And when it came time for me to get my award, he squinted and looked and squinted and said, "What a part of Sicily are you from?"
Yes.
And the mic was live, and the people looked, and they were apologizing to me. I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. That only Italians were getting an award. It was only natural for him to figure, I don't know who the hell this guy is, but he has to be Italian, you know. But the greatest thing about human life is how much you can enjoy the compatibility when you get to know the different cultures and the different people. And when you realize what Europe had done to Africa because of their resources and their military ability to dominate, I would not want anyone to feel awkward because this happened hundreds of years ago, nor do I believe that because of your color, you should get reimbursement because of what some people have done. But I went to high school, college, and law school through the GI Bill. They were saying, not because you're Black, but because you gave 4 years to your country, you got shot up, and we want to pay you back. We're not going to give you any money, but we'll get you a chance to get on your feet. Hey, if you can look at a community and know that someone contributed to make them lack education, healthcare, not to start the race off on the same level as someone else, it's immoral not to say that I want to get you back on your feet so that you can join the race as everyone else. But anyway, we do have an opportunity next year. And
Yes.
we do have some great hopes in Georgia. And life is a test. And I have found that every time something hurts me and I get angry with God, that she calls down and says, "Charlie, you no good son of a gun. I want you to start now remembering all the blessings that I've given you, and then you get back to me." And when I do that, there's no way to be angry. So as I lost my lifelong friend, David Dinkins, we called each other brother. When I lost my older brother, he was a father, a friend, a mentor. He was all I had. And David realized that he never had a brother. And we formed a relationship together. As a matter of fact, my last story is that David said at one point, Charlie told me that his mother found it awkward explaining that he, David Dinkins, was my brother when everyone knew Charlie only had one brother, I said, well, she said it, David, but she loves you. She just wanted politically to understand why we did that. So he tells the story. He sent my mother a bunch of beautiful red roses, and he sent a letter. He said, "Dear Mrs. Rangel, I'm so sorry that by me calling your son Charlie brother has caused you any awkwardness. But I never had a brother, and I know that you lost your older son, Ralph. And that is why we felt compelled to care for each other. But Mrs. Rangel, I lost my mother a long time ago. And if you were to say that you adopt me as your son, I think that would take care of any misunderstanding." And then David said, Charlie went along with that, except he told me when his mother stopped saying, "My son, the congressman," and start talking about "my son, the mayor," he said, Charlie got a little awkward. But we've had fun together, and I thank God that even though I lost two brothers, I could not possibly know where I would be without those two people in my life.
My condolences for that, because obviously it's very strong in you that, and I understand. I went through that, not with the brother, but with my love.
It's been a pleasure being on your show. I met my wife in 1956, and all of the jobs I've had required me either to go to Albany or to Washington every week. So I never really knew that getting married was 24 hours a day and 7 days a week.
Yep.
But since I retired, I've been trying to make up for it.
I'm sorry for, we have been talking for more than an hour now, so I'm really sorry to have kept you from your wife, but I am so, so, so grateful and honored you did this interview with me. I'm gonna cherish this for all my life. I'm gonna send you the link to this and everything, and thank you, thank you, thank you again.
Thank you so much, and continue your great work. We love you.
Thank you. I love you too. I love you too. And thank you to all my viewers. And we'll see you back next Saturday for another appointment with my Harlem portraits. Thank you, Honorable Rangel.
Thank you. God bless you.